This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Now the backs there are. He backs it. He kicks it. Oh, the fall from Dersma. This is the speed of the culture. 3 bounces down the wing. He keeps going. 4 bounces. Join in the chorus. The can't lose Kangas. AFLW premiers.
Hello, welcome back once again to North Pod, and coming to you after a round 19 loss to the Swans. What's new, guys? It's I think our 8th or 9th loss in a row against the Swans. We've got a pretty bad record against them. I think once you go back past sort of 4 or 5 games, it tends to be a little bit irrelevant because of how much has changed since then. But it's never a good feeling coming up against the Swans. Heeney tends to play a good game. Chad Warner tends to play a good game, and I mean, back in the day, Franklin, I think, would play a fairly good game against us as well. It was a pretty solid first half, but a real shocker of a second half. Not necessarily in that we were absolutely terrible, but I mean, the standard of football was pretty awful, particularly in that third quarter. It was a pretty dour affair. Definitely not one that we're going to be using to advertise the game of football, this one. It was pretty unwatchable after half-time. The Swans were able to grind out a win. Unfortunately for us, that does, of course, mean it's not the result that we were looking for. And to be honest, not a lot to be happy about other than the fact that it wasn't a blowout loss. So we'll talk all about that and a few other things that have come up throughout the week. But let's jump right into Roo Review. So, as we know, Tristan Xerri was suspended for 3 games. I'll chat about that a little bit later on in my frustrations with that. But that did mean there were quite a few changes, 4 changes in fact. So coming out, Finbar Maley, who was dropped alongside Scott and Hansen Jr., and then Xerri with the suspension. Coming in, LDU, Kel Coleman-Jones to be the primary ruck, Zach Banch to debut in place of Robert Hansen Jr., and then Bryn Teakle replacing Finbar Maley as that kind of forward that goes into the ruck, or at least that was the plan. Like I said, Zach Banch playing his first game as a mid-season recruit for us, small forward, getting a chance, which was fantastic for him, although he started the sub. I don't love starting a debutant as the sub. I understand that he is the 23rd player, as it were, but I just think if it's your first game, get the player into the game early, give him a chance to get the nerves out of the way quickly. As it turns out, he came on at quarter time due to an injury, but yeah, I don't love debuting as the sub. It's something that we've done in the past, other teams have done in the past. It's not unheard of by any stretch. It's just not a great look, I don't think. You can start him on the bench, no troubles with that, but as the sub, I think it doesn't help a debutant because you're just sitting there, wondering when your time's going to come and getting nervous. So anyway, Zach Banch ended up being the sub, and will feel like, I guess, worth noting his 50th game. He's ground out 50 games. Don't know if he's got too many more in him. He's coming out of contract at the end of the year, but to get to 50 games, given what he's been through, and I guess what he's got to work with, I think has been a really good effort. Unfortunately, the game, like I said, didn't go our way. The Swans won by 31 points, 12-12-84. The Swans to North Melbourne 7-11, 53. It was pretty comfortable in the end, although it was until early on or midway through that third quarter. Even I think early in the last, we were a chance, but the Swans did kick away pretty soon after that. It was not a great game of football, as I said. I guess in terms of how the game started, we saw Kel Coleman-Jones starting in the first ruck contest, which I guess affirmed what most of us were thinking, that he would be the primary ruck with Teakle supporting him. Coming up against Brodie Grundy was always going to be a tough assignment without Tristan Xerri. It would have been a fantastic matchup to watch if Xerri was able to play, I think. But unfortunately, CCJ comes back in, was supposed to be, I guess, a really feel-good moment for him returning from his Achilles injury that he suffered early last year. Getting his opportunity with Xerri's suspension, and he's coming out of contract at the end of the year. It was supposed to be a chance for him to show whether or not he's worth re-signing. I'll talk about it now. I guess unfortunately he went down with what appeared to be a calf injury. Was subbed out at quarter time, and so we really got to see very little of him. I mean, he didn't go fantastic in the handful of ruck contests that he went, but didn't get a good shot at it. And it really, really sucks for him, and also I think it it's going to make it really hard for us to recontract him, I think, just based on, what we've seen, his exposed form, and also the fact that his body has let him down a little bit, which is a real shame. That there's still 5 weeks left, but I think the fact that he's done a calf, or if he has hurt himself, really his best shot at getting into the side, I think, was with Xerri out. There's a chance that, if he's able to get himself fit again, we can play him as the second ruck and play him as a forward. That's obviously the role that he was primarily playing before he did his injury, but even then, he was in and out of the side. He wasn't exactly setting the world on fire. So tough, and obviously in terms of this game, it made life really difficult for us because it meant that Teakle had to shoulder most of the ruck duties with Jack Darling chopping him out at times and giving it a go. Gave Grundy a lot of opportunities. He was absolutely the dominant ruckman on the ground, and we'll talk about that as the game goes on. In terms of how the rest of the first quarter went, we saw Will Dawson starting back. Charlie Comben was playing forward, so there, I guess, the 2 swing men in the side, and we decided to start with them in those positions. Dawson was getting taken to the cleaners early by McLean. It was not looking good early days, and you wondered if potentially it was going to be one of those young player finding out, learning opportunities. I thought Dawson settled after a pretty poor start, gave up a couple of marks, and definitely looked out of sorts early on. And so did the team in general, really. I thought Grundy was dominating in the ruck, and Teakle came in and went forward and took a nice contested mark and kicked a goal, which steadied things for us. But it was 3-1 after not too long. The Swans were looking on top, and I thought the early danger signs were there. But given the Swans only kicked 12 for the game, the fact that they were able to kick 3 pretty early on says that this was potentially where, I won't say they won it here, but they got themselves out to a nice lead here that they were able to defend for the next 3 quarters or so. Cole McKercher unfortunately had a couple of poor moments. One of those was in the first quarter, just missed Toby Pink going across goal, which created an opportunity, nearly cost us. Fortunately, it didn't, but that was one of a couple of Cole McKercher's mistakes in this game. He takes a lot of responsibility on. He's playing a difficult role as that distributor, but got to be better than what he was with a couple of these kicks coming out of defence, and particularly if you're kicking us across goal, you've got to hit that target. So unfortunate there. Cooper Harvey found a really nice spot and kicked a goal early on, which was important because we were finding the going tough pretty early on, and we were relatively efficient going forward. Actually, in that first term, it was just our efficiency with kicking across the ground that was a bit of a struggle. We saw CCJ go down late in the first quarter, like I mentioned. Charlie Comben had an opportunity on the siren, just had it fade late after a really nice quick transition where we just played on every chance going down the wing. Chom marked it probably just inside 50, and like I said, his kick faded late. That was really the best opportunity that he got for the entire game when he was playing forward. Found it really difficult to get separation from his defender, was spoiled consistently, and it wasn't a spoil coming late. It was, both him and his defender really coming out to the ball at the same time. He gave himself no opportunity, or just didn't have any separation. Like I said, he was finding the going tough in that forward line, and I think part of that is the fact that Nick Larkey's not in there creating some space. I think if Larkey's in there, he's a magnet. He's going to draw Sydney defenders to him, and that's going to give someone like Chom as a second or third tall more opportunities. But in any case, it was not a bad first quarter by any stretch. I thought we went in with some momentum. I certainly went in feeling like we were in the game, definitely in the game. In fact, at quarter time. The second quarter, Grundy continued to dominate the ruck against Teakle, but we were doing a really good job of sharking and reading his taps and breaking even in terms of the clearance game. We weren't blowing them away. We weren't winning it, but I thought we were winning our fair share, particularly given we were losing the hit out by such a significant margin. Grundy then gave up a beautiful cross-goal kick, just hit beautifully to Jack Darling, who was able to kick a goal, and we were all square. I think it was 22 apiece at that point, maybe something like that. And you thought maybe is that going to get inside Brodie Grundy's head as essentially the only ruckman of note in the game. A gift for Jack Darling, who duly slotted it. And, our tackling pressure was really high. It was fantastic to start the second quarter. We had a lot of repeat stoppages. We saw Constanti, we saw Luke Parker, plenty of North Melbourne players, funny that those two that I've mentioned are former Swans players, but we saw a really intense pressure in terms of our tackling and an intent to tackle in that front half to start the second quarter. Our pressure rating was really high, and I thought, it showed that we really wanted to be in the game. We were trying our absolute best to corral and pressure Sydney at every turn. It just wasn't resulting in enough on the scoreboard for us. I think we've heard that a lot of times before, and eventually the dam walls didn't break during the second quarter, but there were little cracks forming where the Swans were able to transition very quickly and get the ball up the end a lot faster than we would like. And a lot of the time it was based on our mistakes. We were cruising forward at one point, a backwards handball from Sheasel misses Luke Parker. It's a turnover, and Sydney go end to end, and Heeney kicks a goal. It's classic North Melbourne stuff. Sheasel had a bit of a poor game actually with his disposal. He missed his hand pass. There was a kick later on that he shanked that normally he wouldn't. So yeah, just those mistakes really costly because good teams, and Sydney is not a fantastic team this year, but they have some really good players, and if you give those good players opportunities like Heeney, like Goulden, like Warner, those players through the middle part of the ground are going to be really damaging if you allow them opportunities, which we just gave them a couple too many chances in that second quarter. You could see there's a bit of a disconnect between our forwards. There was a bit of a spoiling each other in the air when a ball went in central. Dylan Stevens was involved in that one. He was running back with the flight. And went for a spoil rather than taking, or I guess went to market when he was out of position. Fortunately, it spilt, and Constanti was able to get a nice assist to Sheasel, who kicks the goal. And again, we stayed in touch. I thought Jai Simpkin really came into the game in the second quarter. He was playing a lot of time off the wing, but then going into the occasional clearance or stoppage opportunity and getting a clearance. I thought he had a really strong game, and the second quarter was where we started to see him really ply his trade. I think he got his confidence. He was going around plays. He wasn't always effective with his disposal. We know that he's not the most incisive or efficient play, but I thought he was doing well enough with his disposals, and certainly not being a liability. Half time, we're 3 goals down. Chom is doing absolutely nothing forward. Teakle's getting slaughtered in the ruck, but we're in it. We're 3 goals down, and whilst it's a low scoring game, I thought we were doing enough to suggest that we could compete in the second half. So long as we were able to stop Sydney's good players, and I think Heeney is probably the one that's worth mentioning here. He'd had a good first half. Unfortunately, he only got better as the game went on. He was slaughtering us and doing damage in that first half, and boy, did he turn it on in the second half. Like I said, the third quarter is one that I would suggest not watching. Just a pretty awful quarter of football, just the one goal. We kicked it. It was not the sort of game that you're going to write home about, or quarter you're going to write home about. It was the Swans missing opportunities, a lot of kicking backwards, a lot of slow build-up, a lot of turnover just from kicking it down the line, creating a contest, and then repeat stoppages. It was, not a great quarter to watch. Xerri and Curtis were having nearly games. There was so many times where they nearly marked it or fumbled it when they nearly had an opportunity. Really tough game for them. Because, with Larkey out of the side, they've got to be doing a lot more than they were in this one. So they had a tough quarter, which summed up their tough game. And then, there was plays like Griffin Logue took a couple of intercepts. He played an okay game in terms of finding the footy. He found the footy well enough. But he's streaming down the wing. He's got time and space, and then just shanks a kick. Or it wasn't even a shank. He appeared to just, pick out the Swans players. I don't know what's wrong with his decision-making at the moment. He just seems to be, always picking the third of two options, Griffin Logue. No pressure, just killer from a senior player. He's one that, we brought across hoping that he could be a really reliable defender, and I think he did that for, about 2/3 of a year. Unfortunately, then went down with his knee injury, and he just has not been the same since then, and this quarter was a good showcase of that. Even despite all of the poor play, and the Jai Simpkin was the only one that was able to kick a goal in this quarter, kicked a fairly solid snap from a stoppage situation. Despite all that rough play, we're in the game. Paul Curtis then looks to kick one off the ground for a goal. Personally, watching it, I thought, to me, it looked like it was kicking in danger against Paul Curtis, but the goal umpire signalled for a goal. And then what ensued was a goal review where we were trying to determine whether or not the Sydney's players' hands were the last touch or Paul Curtis's boot was the last touch. For me, if that's what you're trying, and they were sort of simultaneous to me, if that's what you're trying to determine, to me that's a pretty clear kicking in danger. But In any case, I don't think that's a call that I'm sure it's not a call they can make during the score review. All they can do in that moment is determine whether or not it was kicked or touched last. To my eye, I don't think we actually saw on the footage conclusive evidence that it was touched last by the Sydney player. I think probably it was. I just don't know that I saw conclusive evidence. Anyway, that they overturned it, and so it went from being a goal to a point. And that was a big moment because that goal would have brought us within about a goal or so. Unfortunately, it gets overturned, and we lose that momentum, I guess, and that was, that would have been potentially a moment to get Paul Curtis into the game as well. I would have loved to see Oily Paul, sell a bit more, celebrate the goal. He was pretty casual about it. I don't know if it's because he knew it was touched or if he wasn't sure or if he just genuinely was feeling like, let's get on with it because he wasn't having a great game. I'm not too sure, but I would have loved to see him sell it a little bit. Anyway, we go into three-quarter time, 2 goals down, and, like I said, we're in the game. And I think even though I'm pretty disappointed with our individual performances in this game, I think the fact that we're only 2 goals down at three-quarter time and we're in it, if I think back to what I was wanting last week, particularly with Larkey and Xerri out, I think you're pretty happy with the scoreline at three-quarter time. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, it did fall away in that last term. Isaac Heeney kicked a couple of goals, particularly early on, to make the going pretty tough. Charlie Comben and Will Dawson swapped, so Chom went back and Will Dawson went forward, and immediately you could see the difference in Chom's game. He looked a lot more at home. He took some intercept marks, found plenty of the footy in that one quarter, and it does make you wonder if, whilst he's still got plenty to learn as a defender, particularly if he's going to be a lockdown one-on-one defender, you can see that he's learnt a lot about playing this intercepting defender role over the past 18 months, and potentially that's a better spot for him long-term. Maybe. I'm certainly not going to make that decision based off one game, but he found the going really tough in that forward half for the first 3 quarters and looked way more at home, albeit in a much easier role in that last quarter. Will Dawson didn't see a lot of the footy. It's hard to judge him based on the one quarter because the ball did not go down to our forward line very often, but I like the fact that Clarko was mixing things up in the last quarter and trying a few different things. Chom certainly wasn't working forward, so I do like get him into the game, but get him into a position that he's a bit more comfortable with at the moment. Cold McKercher absolutely butchered one coming out of halfback again. He's had a really good year for a second-year player. I mentioned him before. Takes on a lot of responsibility, but again, I don't know how he shanked that one as bad as he did. It went straight to Chad Warner, who then... went straight to Haywood, who then kicked it on to Warner, who kicked a goal. If that wasn't the gut punch, it was probably the Heeney kicking the goal after that I think was the decider. We kicked a couple after that. We saw Simpkins shark one on the wing and went long to Cooper Harvey, who kicked another. We saw Chom, like I said, intercepting off half-back. Cold McKercher kicked a consolation goal after a nice gut run to the corridor, but ultimately it wasn't too little too late. It was just too little. We weren't quite good enough in the last quarter. Heeney went up a notch in that last quarter. He had a phenomenal game. I'll talk about him in a moment, but ultimately a 31-point loss, and I think, based on how we played and the individual performances within the game, I think 31 points is a pretty good result. Not in terms of, I think we'd like to be a couple of goals closer, but we did not have a lot of players play a good game. We were obviously missing some important players, although LDU coming back in was super important for us. I just think... it's a disappointing game. I'm not happy with it, but to only lose by 31 playing as poorly as we did, I think you've kind of got to take it, even though, at this point in our development, Sydney, this is a game that we should be competing. Sydney's not going to make the 8. I know mathematically they're a chance, but I can't see them making the 8 from where they are. It's going to be really tough. I think we're down to the 9 teams that are currently in the top 9 to make the 8. So if you're playing a bottom 8 side, I think really we should be competing better than we did against Sydney. Ultimately, they had too many star players play well enough, and we lose by 5 goals, and we've got a fair bit to unpack as a result of that. Story of the game, and I've mentioned him a couple of times, Isaac Heeney was the game winner for the Swans. I don't often talk about opposition players in depth, but I think when one player single-handedly dismantles you and beats you, I think it's worth talking about. We just had no answers for him. 34 disposals, 5 goals, 13 clearances, 5 tackles, 8 marks. 2 of those contested, nearly 600 metres gained, a goal assist, 9 inside 50s. One of the best games I've seen from an opposition player in terms of the stat sheet. It wasn't necessarily a super flashy game. I think that's probably what brings it down a peg. But, statistically speaking, I think the commentary was saying that no one in, since Champion Data's kept records, no one's had 13 clearances and kicked 5 goals or better. Like, that's one of the best clearance goal combinations ever. And you felt it. It was just such a good contested game from him. He made it look easy. We started the game with Tommy Powell mostly matching up on him. Second half, it looked like we had Luke Parker mostly matching up on him. But he was just too good. He read the play really well. When Grundy was able to get taps down to him, he did so. When he drifted forward, he was super dangerous, obviously kicking 5 goals. And, he's a match winner in a game that was crying out for a match winner. There wasn't a lot of flash in this game, but he did a couple of special things. And ultimately, he was a difference maker for me because the Swans kicked 12 goals for the game. He kicked 5 of them. And those 13 clearances are massively important in a game where the goals from clearance were the main score source. There wasn't a lot of chains going end to end. There certainly was not a lot of, free-flowing football. So it was clearances win the game, and that's what won the game for Sydney in that last quarter as well. They got on top on clearance. They were able to score from them, and Heeney was obviously a big part of that. We just lacked a game winner like that, and we have for several years. We haven't had a player that can consistently have a standout performance and win a game off his back. LDU is the kind of player that we want to be able to do that, but he hasn't been able to do that with any level of consistency. He's often playing really well in a poorly performing side. The ruck battle was interesting. I guess that's the other thing to talk about in terms of the story of the game. Clearly, we went in with a plan to rove to Grundy. I think we're expecting to lose the ruck battle regardless. But once Coleman Jones went down, that was exacerbated, and the plan was very clearly, let's just put a body on him and then try to shark his hit-outs. And I think for 3 quarters, we did a pretty good job of that. We lost the hit-outs 80-10. So, it was an absolute shellacking, but I think we almost gave up on the hit-outs and looked to try and read his hit-outs. In the last quarter, the clearances got away from us. It was 52-37 in the end, but it was relatively even to 3-quarter time. So we did a pretty good job, and I think that's why I'm not saying that was the absolute difference in the game, because we competed for a long time, particularly given we had absolutely no answers for Grundy, and Teakle and Darling did their best, but I think ultimately their role was just to make sure he wasn't going to take it, that Grundy wasn't going to take it out of the ruck, and to make his hit-outs a little bit less predictable to the Swans players. I think we did a pretty good job of that. I thought Teakle competed as hard as he could, and Darling did what he could. We gave away quite a few free kicks in the ruck, not just to Grundy, but I think that's going to happen when you're clearly outsized and outskilled in that ruck position. But yeah, it was I guess sheer weight of numbers in the end meant that the Swans finally were able to break our back in that last quarter. And you could argue that the clearances in that last quarter is the difference maker. But I guess in saying that, Isaac Heeney was a big part of that. So I think those are the 2 things that really decide this game. We just didn't have a ruck that could go with Grundy and Heeney. We didn't have anyone that could compete with Heeney defensively or do anything close to what he was doing offensively. So it's not often in a game of football that one player beats you. You see that in other sports like a basketball, for example, where there's only 5 on the court at once. But when you're playing 18 on a side, typically you're going to have several opposition players that you've got to contend with to stop. I really think if you take Heeney out of this game, we're a good chance to win because his impact was absolutely phenomenal. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. We're missing Tristan Xerri for another 2 weeks. It's going to be a real challenge with him out of the side, particularly if Coleman Jones is out as well. I don't know what we do. I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But just beaten by a better midfield, unfortunately, and having that dominance in the ruck definitely helps. Shinboner of the week, and it was tough. There wasn't really any highlight plays for North Melbourne, so I wasn't going to pull anything out of there. But what I would say is, and I've mentioned him already, Teakle, I think, competed really, really well. He went in expecting to be the second ruck option, then had to ruck the majority of the game, and I thought toiled really hard. So he's your Shinboner of the week. I think a massive effort for him. His stats aren't amazing. 17 disposals, so found a fair bit of the footy around the ground. 5 marks, 6 tackles, 5 hit-outs, 5 clearances. So you can see didn't get much of a go in the ruck, but like I mentioned, he toiled away, went forward and kicked a goal, kicked our first goal for the game. So I think, did a bit around the ground. It's not enough for him to get a vote, but I thought it was a real gutsy effort from him. He wasn't expecting to be the primary ruck in this game. It's his first game for the year. We've obviously been at the club now for just over a year as a mid-season recruit last year. Played a bit of footy after that. I don't think he missed a game in the second half of the year, but with Jack Darling coming across, there hasn't been a role for him. The fact that he stepped in and competed as well as he did and tried his guts out all game, I think, did his best. Could not match Grundy, but was a real Shinboner effort given he was undersized and certainly outpointed. So he is your Shinboner of the week. Going to the North Podium voting, obviously no one got the 4 and no one got the 3 either. I don't think anyone was playing a fantastic game. But I do have a 2 vote, just the 1-2 vote. Jai Simpkin, I mentioned him earlier on, 28 disposals, kicked the only goal in that third quarter. 9 marks, 3 tackles, a goal assist, 800 metres gained, 9 inside 50s. One of his better games, I thought, did a really good job of finding space. Sure, missed a kick or two, but holistically, his impact was fantastic for us. I thought he found space with his step, which is something that he hasn't been able to do as much of this year. And I think found a really good balance of that forward play, that wing play. As I said, drifted into a few of those stoppages once the game got a bit congested. But I thought this was the best game I've seen him play in quite some time. A real captain's performance in a side that wasn't performing well and with not a lot of teammates performing well either. I thought he played a fantastic game. So fantastic that Jai Simpkin was able to find some form here. Then I got a couple of 1 voters. LDU, 26 disposals, 5 marks, 3 tackles, 5 clearances, 2 goal assists. I think you'd just say played his role. Wasn't a fantastic game by him. Wasn't a game where he had elite impact, but I thought did his role enough as that midfielder. Certainly was outpointed by Simpkin. Simpkin played a more important game, but I thought LDU was solid in his role as that number 1 mid, so couldn't go past him for the 1 vote. And the 2 goal assist does speak to the fact that he was impacting scoring. Finn O'Sullivan off half-back in that wing role, 20 disposals, 9 marks, 1 of those contested, 5 intercepts. Continues to impress me off half-back. I think he's going to be a really solid player for us through the middle part of the ground over the next couple of years. You'd expect that from a number 2 draft pick. So no great surprise, but the fact that he was able to, he just has so much time. He's got really assured, played on quickly a couple of times when he took marks and tried to get the ball moving as fast as he could. I thought he played a really nice game considering the result. Riley Hardiman, pretty similar, obviously strictly off half-back with that raking left foot, 18 disposals, 7 marks, 1 contested, 450-odd metres gained, 5 intercepts, and I think, did a great job of getting good penetration on the footy. He's not necessarily biting off those short kicks like a Caleb Daniel or McKercher, but he's often the one delivering it long after, running his full distance, and I thought played an important role. Played his role is what I guess I'm trying to say. That's what a 1 vote is for playing your role, and I thought that Riley Hardiman did that off half-back in this one. And then lastly, Toby Pink, just the 8 touches, 2 marks, 2 tackles, 4 intercepts, 7 spoils. Similarly, I thought, played his role. None of those Swans tools were able to get off the chain and kick more than a goal. It was really Heeney doing the damage up front, kicking 5 of their 12 goals, and I think Pink was our best key defender. Often saw him spoiling, went at 100% effectiveness with his disposals, which is, you'd expect that you expect that he's very efficient because he shouldn't be taking risky kicks or disposals, but was solid in his role. And I think given the amount of ball that the Swans got and the way it was coming in at times from the midfielders, I thought Toby Pink stood up pretty well and was our best key defender. Chom went back there and was solid in the last quarter, but that's not enough to win him a vote. So going over that again, Jai Simpkin 2 votes, and then 1 vote to LDU, Finn O'Sullivan, Riley Hardiman, and Toby Pink. Only the 5 players in the votes this week, I think, speaks to the fact that we didn't have a lot of good individual performances. It was a pretty dull and dire game. Like others that were okay, like Tommy Power was okay, but was slaughtered by Isaac Heeney as his direct opponent in that first half. Cooper Harvey kicked 2 goals from his very limited opportunities, but you'd probably like to see him get involved a little bit more in order to get him into the votes. Bryn Teakle was, I guess, close from the perspective that he battled, but I don't think that you could say, I couldn't give him a vote based on that performance because Grundy, his direct opponent, was so good. So quite a few of those that were probably just a touch below a vote, and then there were some that obviously just didn't get anywhere near it, like Paul Curtis and Cam Xerri, barely touched the footy. So a disappointing return from a lot of individuals in this game, but I guess that's what's going to happen late in the year. Playing a side away, it's tough going. Looking at the North Podium voting standings, Xerri and Sheasel remain on top on 20 votes. LDU moves into outright second on 17 votes, and then behind Parker 16, Curtis 14, McKercher and Powell 13, Larkey, Xerri and Simpkin on 12. So Simpkin moving up a little bit on the back of those 2 votes. Only 5 games to go, so heating up, and Sheasel and Xerri are at the moment competing for that top spot, but with Xerri missing the next 2 games, it's there for Sheasel for the taking, I would say. Thanks so much for being a loyal listener of North Pod. I really appreciate your support. If you could share this out with any other North Melbourne fans that you know, I'd really appreciate it. And if you could subscribe on your chosen podcast service, you can also get involved with my social media at North Pod Show, and you can find my Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes if you'd like to support the show in an additional way. Thank you so much for being a loyal listener. Kanga clipboard time now, and look, a couple of notes to go through. In general, I think it was one of our worst offensive games in a while. I've spoken about a few of the individuals already. Missing Larkey, obviously, as that focal point, that's one thing. That has to factor in. It's going to be important. That does change our entire forward structure. So I don't want to minimise that because that's quite a large part of the reason why our forward half performance was poor. But, that's going to mean that there's more opportunities for Cam Xerri and for Paul Curtis. And for me, they have to do better in stepping up. I think what we see here is that neither of them are able to be even close to that focal point in the forward line, unfortunately. And so when you're missing Nick Larkey, like I mentioned with Charlie Comben, he draws a lot of defenders to him. And if you're missing him, all of a sudden it means that there's more attention on these other forwards. That being said, Paul Curtis in particular dropped a couple of marks that I think normally he would take, and Cam just couldn't get free. He couldn't shake his opponent. There was never really a moment where Cam Xerri was on the lead and was ignored or dropped a mark. He just didn't feature really when we were going forward. Darling was up there in part to carry the load, but did then have to spend a lot of time in the ruck as a result of Coleman Jones going down. But he's important structurally. You'd probably like to see a little bit more from him. Chom just couldn't get any separation. I've spoken about him. I don't think playing him forward at the moment is going to work, but I do appreciate the experimentation because I think we haven't really seen him in that role at all this year, or certainly not for any extended period. So look, he didn't look at home in the forward line. Like I mentioned, he was absolutely worn like a glove. So that didn't work. And then the Smalls just, whilst there was some pressure coming from them, there wasn't a lot of impact. Cooper Harvey kicked the 2 goals, but barely touched it besides that. Constanti, I thought his pressure was good, his tackling was good, but certainly didn't do enough outside of that for me. And then I guess it's, Zach Banch is playing game 1. I'm not about to hang him out to dry. He didn't touch much of the football, but he's been picked up in the mid-season draft after playing VFL footy for Werribee. My expectations of him are low, and he's replacing Robert Hansen Jr., who also wasn't having an amazing impact. So look, it's a bit of a sorry state of affairs. It's not a great omen for our prospects in the future because if our entire forward structure revolves around Nick Larkey and him creating opportunities for others, that's a bit of a concern. I think for sure the delivery was poor at times, don't get me wrong. Like sometimes the ball, like I mentioned Griffin Logue running down the wing, perfectly without an opponent, and he shanks the kick. Like there's nothing the forwards can do about that. But I think you could tell that for me the leading patterns were just a bit wonky with the shift in soldiers. There was clearly not a lot of synergy between our talls and our smalls. We didn't see any of that hitting the front of the contest. We often saw, like I mentioned, there was a couple of times where we spoiled each other because we weren't sure who was leading to what spot. I think, it's going to be makeshift until Nick Larkey returns, but I think ultimately I, myself, and probably us as fans need to be comfortable with the fact that we're going to see some experimentation and just accept that, because ultimately there's not a lot for us to gain in these last 5 games. Plenty to lose, I think. If we start getting belted, particularly by the Saints and Richmond, like that is going to be a real dint for morale, and that's not going to be good for us. But there's not a whole lot to be gained. So I don't mind experimentation so long as it's within reason. You don't want to see something crazy. But this forward line mix for me didn't really work. I think we'll need to go back to the drawing board on this one. Speaking of what's not working, Griffin Logue, I think, is one I need to talk about. I just don't know what we do about him. He's really out of sorts with his footy at the moment, showing none of that assuredness that we saw in that first season before he did his knee. And I don't know, we probably don't have enough soldiers right now to drop him. Will Dawson, Chom and Pink for me is enough height in the back half. None of them are absolute beasts, but unfortunately that's what we've got. Griffin Logue also is not a beast. I personally would like to see him go back to the VFL. I wonder if, because Elmac's out for the rest of the year, we might see Griffin Logue stay in the side as that older head, pretty flexible player, and that he can play tall and he can play medium. McDonald's probably more of a can play medium, can play small, but can play a similar role. I wonder if Aiden Core, is able to get injury free, maybe he might replace Logue. I think Core is more flexible and can play more positions than Griffin Logue can. But neither of them have been in good form this year, to be clear. We've seen both of them dropped throughout the year. It's just a worry for me going forward. He's contracted for more years, Griffin Logue. He's come across supposed to be that senior cool head in the back half, and just mentally it seems to me as though he's not the same after his run of injuries. And for me, a lot of it comes down to his decision making. It's not necessarily that he's getting completely manhandled or outmaneuvered. There's a little bit of that for sure, but I think it's his decision making that's really letting him down at the moment. And that's a harder thing to fix, I think, because it's such a quick instinctive thing. And sure, you can be coached, but Griffin Logue's not someone that needs to be coached out of making ridiculous decisions. It's himself letting him down, and it's himself letting himself down. I don't know that made sense, but you get my gist. I'm sure that upon reflection, he knows that he's making these mistakes. The trouble is that he keeps making them in the moment. So I'm sure the coaches would be telling him not to. I'm sure he would know not to. But ultimately, if your decision making in game is letting you down, that's a really tough thing to fix up. So look, he's a bit of a worry for me. Josh Goder is one that maybe could come in for him if we're comfortable with his body. He's played a couple of VFL games now, so that's an option. But he's pretty similar to Riley Hardiman in terms of their left footers. They're medium sized. They're distributors who can also defend. It's tough. It's a tough one with Griffin Logue at the moment. I really thought going into this year, he was going to get a clean run on it and we're going to see him back to his best. That has not been the case this year. He's been really disappointing, unfortunately, for us, Griffin Logue. And I don't know, these last 5 games, it's going to be really, really interesting to see if he can hold his spot and if he can restore some of the faith that I think a lot of people will have been running out of for him. And then I guess we look at the midfield group as the last note on my clipboard here. I would assume, and you would assume, that George Wardlaw is going to come back in. He returned through the VFL this week and lit it up, to be honest. So you'd assume that he's going to return, I would think, which is going to give us a bit more grunt in the middle. Is it as simple as taking Will Phillips out? He's been okay and, at times looked great, but at times made some really, really bad mistakes like he did in this game. Dropped a sitter at one point on half forward that led to a stoppage instead of him kicking inside 50. Missed a few hand passes. He's definitely made some mistakes. He has not, by any stretch, taken this opportunity with both hands. By the same token, I think defensively he's a really good player because he does have that ability to tackle. He distributes. He gets other players involved. So, look, personally, I think I would probably keep Will Phillips in and drop one of those small forwards. I don't think we'd be playing Banch, Curtis, Constanti, and Cooper Harvey. Banch is obviously the one that would fall out from that group at the moment. But I suspect that Will Phillips will probably drop out. It's just tough because you've probably got a couple too many of those mids that can't play forward. Like Wardlaw doesn't really play forward, Phillips doesn't play forward, Powell doesn't spend a lot of time in the forward half. So if you've got Simpkin and you've got LDU and you've got Parker that can rest forward, and you've got Wardlaw and Phillips potentially not, I think probably the balance is tricky. There's other levers that you can pull. There's other things that you can decide to do, I guess. But I think for me that midfield group got absolutely smashed by Heeney. He's got a hold of us. So you've got you've got to at some point figure out how we're going to counter the opposition's best mids. The tag has gone away, really, unless you have a player that can play a really good defensive game and also impact offensively. It's pretty hard to tag. We saw Will Phillips try to do it on Pickett last week. It's not impossible, but he's the one of that midfield group that could be a tagger. So do you keep him in as flexibility for that? It's interesting. One way or another, our midfield mix is not quite right. Obviously, missing Xerri really hurts our clearance capacity and our general midfield capacity. So I take that on board and I take that into account. But look, either way, we're going to have to change some things in that midfield group. What I would say, though, is it's great that we've got Luke Parker in there and he will continue to coach that, be an on-field coach. We saw him doing that in this game. There's a lot of talk. He was trying in that second half to quell Heeney and also to be an on-field coach. Whilst his output on-field has been a little spotty the last couple of weeks, he's made some uncharacteristic mistakes, been a little bit below his usual standard. I still think he's a really, really important footy IQ guy to be out there and help this young midfield develop, particularly when you've got guys like Wardlaw, like Phillips, like Powell running through there, and you've got Sullivan through the middle part of the ground as well on that wing. So, look, whilst Parker's on-field output has dropped a little bit, I think it's great that we can have him in there. I expect to see a little bit of a change in that balance next week through the middle part of the ground. We know that Geelong's pretty young through the midfield. They've got a really good young group. Bailey Smith obviously is that leading that pack at the moment, but I'm expecting to see a little bit of change in that midfield balance. And if it is just Phillips out, Wardlaw in, I would understand that, but I probably would like to see us go a little bit wider with our midfield distribution because our fitness running out games has been an issue. And drop one of those small forwards. Pretty tough to drop Cooper Harvey at the moment, so it'd be Zach Banch and me who, is unlucky. He's come in and played one game, but in terms of the balance of the side, I think that would make the most sense for me. And final segment around Arden Street. I mentioned the VFL a couple of times with George Wardlaw coming back through it. Unfortunately, we fell apart in the VFL, also playing Sydney. 92-81 was that loss, but we got out to a big lead in the first quarter and then just got dragged back by Sydney. Didn't do a whole lot after that first quarter. In terms of AFL listed players, George Wardlaw is the one that was a standout. 29 disposals, 6 tackles, 9 clearances. I think for me that says he's going to return and hopefully he can stay concussion and injury free for the rest of the year. He'll definitely come back in so long as they're happy with the way that his body holds up. Josh Goder, as I mentioned, he had 19 touches. He's a potential replacement in that back half for someone like Griffin Logue. But like I said, maybe a bit of a similar role to Riley Hardiman. But I think we'll look to get him back at some stage before the end of the year just to get him a bit of confidence with his body going into the year next year. He's contracted, so he's definitely going to stick around. And then we saw Maley kick 2 goals, Hanson Jr. kick 2 goals. It's good when you get dropped to go back and show something. So it was good that those 2 players could do that. Dersma found a bit of the footy, but in a game where you lose like this, there's not a lot of positives to draw out of it. Not a lot of competition for spots. So Wardlaw is the only absolute standout for me that's knocking down the door for reselection. I mentioned it during the pod, but Luke McDonald's out for the year now. He's gone in for shoulder surgery, so that is going to mean there's a spot in that back half for someone who wants to take it with both hands. It is unfortunate that Luke McDonald's going to miss. I think he's been really important. He's played really well this year. We know that he went through some challenges over the past couple of years as co-captain. He's been a bit of a whipping boy. He hasn't found his best form, but this year I thought he's been fantastic, been nearly back to his best, really been a rock down there and played some really good shutdown roles. So unfortunately we're going to miss him now for the last month or so, and hopefully he's able to return next season fit and able to return to the form that he's had in this the first half of this year. And then the other thing that I wanted to touch on from North Melbourne news this week, the Tristan Xerri suspension. So I did mention in the podcast last week that he was a chance to be suspended, but I think in my heart of hearts I did genuinely think recording that pretty soon after the game that he'd probably get off. Watching the footage back and, watching it a bit more closely, given the fact that it went to the tribunal and, things transpired across the week, I do understand why ultimately he had to get at least, the tribunal or the MRO had to look at it. I understand that. It's such a complex case. The thing that's challenging is he takes out the arm in what I think is an attempt to stop the player. It's a tackle when you're out of position, essentially, is what he's done there. But it looks like a swinging arm. I understand that. So if the AFL wants to call that a strike, which I guess they have because they've said it's a reportable offence, I can kind of understand that perspective. But this is where I get really frustrated with the system in that essentially he was either going to get 0 or 3, because if it's a reportable offence, it's going to be 3 weeks, and if it's not a reportable offence, it's nothing. I reckon, and I firmly believe, if there is no concussion there, it doesn't look really awful in the way that the Melbourne player Sparrow was, concussed before he hit the ground, knocked out before he hit the ground. If that doesn't happen, it's a free kick for high contact, and I think that's it. Or, if he slightly misses his head and there's no high contact at all, it's play on. And for me to then get penalised for 3 weeks on the back of that, based on what I've just stepped out, I think that's what's at this stage still wrong with the way that the MRO works. I've heard pretty different views across the week. There are some people that think it's pretty fair that he ended up with 3 weeks. There's some people that think it should have been 1 or 2, and I get that perspective. I'd be far more comfortable if it was 1, but under the current rule set, there's just no way for it to be 1 week because, like I said, if it is a reportable offence, it was always going to be severe impact because he ended up with a concussion, which I just don't think it adds up. I understand that the outcome of something has to play some role. If you murder someone, or you do something and it ends up killing someone, you're going to be punished more than if you did that same thing, but you're lucky enough not to kill someone. I guess the example would be if you hit someone with your car. In that case, you might, if you end up being charged with manslaughter, as opposed to causing someone some harm, like breaking a leg, there is a difference in the punishment. So I understand that. If you apply that logic to this situation, that does make sense. But for me, we're also still a game of football, and accidents happen, and no one's life is in danger. So Xerri, at the end of the day, maybe he makes a very small split-second decision that's slightly poor because he could have gone a bit lower, or he could have noticed that Sparrow was lower, and so he then could have pulled his arm out, potentially. We're asking a player to make a really, really, really quick snap decision there, though, to be clear, because we see it in slow motion. It looks a lot worse than it is. I just think, I understand the AFL is wanting to protect the head because they're worried about concussions and being sued in the future. I get that. I understand that. It is a real concern. But we've gone too far, and what we're now essentially saying is, if you hit someone in the head and they get concussed, regardless of your intent and regardless of the actual force, if you just happen to get them in the wrong spot, you're done. There's still a level of inconsistency because if we go back a couple of weeks, Ed Richards elbows LDU in the head. Again, he didn't mean to, but Xerri didn't mean to hit Sparrow in the head. You could argue that that should at least be looked at from the MRO as well, because ultimately LDU was concussed. Like, for me, that's the level of inconsistency. If you're going to say if you concuss someone, regardless of if you mean to, it's a suspension, okay. Like, at least you're being consistent. But I'm not happy with the way that it's going at the moment. I think a lot of fans share that frustration. There's nothing we can do about it. Like, at the end of the day, I think North Melbourne appealed, or took it to the tribunal, knowing that it wasn't going to work. I think they understood that, but they had to, to show support for their player. But ultimately, it was thrown out pretty quickly because, if the player is concussed and you've deemed it at a reportable offence, you've got really nowhere to go. Anyway, that's my rant. It's obviously come and gone now. We've got 2 more games to play without Tristan Xerri, but goodness me, I hope that doesn't come back to haunt us, because it's going to really hurt if we lose a close one in the next few weeks, because we'll be thinking to ourselves, Xerri could have won us that game. Looking ahead to next week, we've got Geelong, Saturday the 26th of July, 7:30 at Marvel, playing the Cats. They're sitting in the bottom half of the 8. They've got a very easy run home. It's going to be a pretty tough assignment without Big X and Nick Larkey. I assume that Larkey won't be back. I'm not certain of that, but given the injury report was pretty vague, that generally doesn't mean that he's about to return. So it's going to be tough going without those two, just like it was this week. The ruck spot is pretty tough. Like, do you bring in Taylor Goad, who is not ready yet, to be clear? Do you hold firm with Teakle and get support from Darling or maybe Finbar Maley you could bring back in and hope that he can be that second ruck? I don't want to see Chom go in there. I don't want to see Will Dawson go in there. I want to see them cementing their roles at either end of the ground. So it's tough. I think for me, I would just go in with Teakle and have Darling be the second ruck, and then just hope for the best in terms of aim to shark the Geelong ruckman's hit outs anyway. They don't have a dominant ruck, so for me that says that you can probably just go in, say that we know we're going to lose the hit out battle, but maybe break even at stoppage. Potentially they'll see this as an opportunity to give Taylor Goad 2 games at it with Xerri missing the next 2. I wouldn't be mad about it, but I would only want to do that if we think that he's ready to compete, because you don't want to bring in a ruckman well before they're ready and have them get smashed and have them embarrassed or lose their confidence. So look, I'll wait with bated breath to see what happens there. I guess the only other thing there to talk about is we've got 5 weeks to go. There's some winnable ones coming up. I think it's important that we stay competitive. We've got to keep morale high so that we can compete against the Saints and Richmond when we play them. They're the 2 most winnable games, I would say, of our last 5, particularly that Richmond game. They're going on to beat West Coast as I'm recording this, which is going to mean that they are going to leapfrog us on the ladder for now. So it's pretty important, therefore, that we beat them when we play them in a few weeks so that we can go back ahead of them. I do not want to see Richmond finishing above us on the ladder. That would be a real issue for us. So we've got to compete. We don't need to beat Geelong. They're going to be a tough assignment, but we've got to compete against them and be in the game at 3/4 time like we were in this one, so that we can go into the Saints game with some morale. 5 weeks to go. I do think our form's wavering a little bit here as we get into the back half of the year. Obviously, injuries and suspensions doesn't help, but hopefully we can return to some relatively competitive form next week and play a good game. I'm hoping to get to that game with Glenn, actually, who I watched the game with last weekend. He's a Geelong supporter. You would have heard him on the podcast a couple of years ago, potentially, if you're a long-time listener. I'm hoping to get to the game with him, so hopefully we can put on a good show. I will inevitably speak to you after that game at some point. Have a fantastic week, and as always, go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at North Pod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.